Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to really dig into a very important document for Baha'i communities everywhere. It's the newly revised Guidelines for Local Spiritual Assemblies. These were shared through a letter from the National Spiritual Assembly dated July 8th, 2025. And look, this isn't just some rule book. It's fundamental. It helps us understand the practical, the spiritual, the administrative life, So our mission today is to kind of unpack the key insights, what this all means for the local spiritual assemblies, the LSAs, and, well, for you listening right now. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. These guidelines, they're really significant. It's more than just a framework, I think. It helps us really grasp the unique character of the Baha'i administrative order. It gives that direction, spiritual and practical, for how communities can actually grow.
Right. So let's start right at the foundation. Chapter 1 of the guidelines lays out these core principles. What's the underlying purpose here, the big vision behind organized Baha'i life?
Well, at its absolute core, the principle is the oneness of humankind. Now, maybe, years ago, people were skeptical. But today, this idea that humanity is one single people is gaining ground. You can see it. People are rejecting prejudice more. There's this sense of world citizenship growing. But Baha'u'llah's idea of oneness, it asks for more than just, cooperation. It really demands a whole rethinking of the relationships in society.
Or rethinking how?
Well, think about the environmental crisis, right? This constant drive for more. It just shows how inadequate our relationship with nature is. Or, problems in family life, the exploitation sometimes of women and children. It points to really flawed ideas about family. The guidelines point out that our current ways of thinking about, say, wealth distribution or how individuals relate to institutions, they're just entirely inadequate for where humanity needs to go.
Inadequate. That's a strong word.
It is. And what's key here is that this administrative order, it isn't just something people invented. Chogi Effendi, he said, the bedrock on which this administrative order is founded is God's immutable purpose for mankind in this day. Its inspiration comes straight from Baha'u'lláh. Its seed, as Chogi Effendi put it, was watered by the blood of no less than 20,000 martyrs. And the guides for it, they're in Abdu'l-Bahá's will and testament and the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah's most holy book. So this order, it's called the nucleus and pattern of the future world order. It's like a divine blueprint for a global civilization aiming for spiritual transformation, real peace.
That is a huge vision, a divine blueprint. But okay, how does something that grand actually, work day to day for a local spiritual assembly? Where does the rubber meet the road, so to speak?
Right. Well, local spiritual assemblies, they have this really unique character. Abdu'l-Bahá himself called them shining lamps in heavenly gardens. He said they are the potent sources of the progress of man. And crucially, he stressed they have neither peer nor likeness in the cycles gone before. They aren't based on human leaders, but on the support of the beauty of Ahad, that's God's power. So their authority, fundamentally, is divinely given.
Okay. And a big part of how they operate is consultation, which sounds like more than just, having a meeting. The guidelines call it a collective search for truth. I love that quote. The shining spark of truth cometh forth only after the clash of differing opinions. It sounds intense almost. How does that clash actually lead to truth?
That's a great point. The job of assembly members, it's not to dictate, but to consult. Every member should feel totally free to express their own view, get all the angles out there, without being, attached to their own idea being the right one. But then, and this is key, once that spiritual discussion leads to a decision, they have to abide by the majority decision.
Right.
Fully support it, no undermining it, even if they personally felt differently at first. That's just fundamentally different from, say, politics, where you often see opposition continuing after a vote.
Right. The goal shifts to unity.
Exactly. Unity and collective action.
And the guidelines use that analogy, the assembly acting like a wise and loving parent, guiding people with love, humility, and a genuine respect.
Yeah.
That feels very different from how we usually think of authority, which can seem kind of top-down or even, punishing. How does an institution actually do that? Be a loving parent while also having to administer laws?
It's a core distinction, yeah. The approach is meant to be far removed from the harshly judgmental and punitive approach you often see elsewhere. It's really about nurturing potential, guiding people toward growth. And connecting this outwards, LSAs also work with other Baha'i institutions, like the Continental Boards of Counselors and auxiliary boards. There's this dynamic interdependence. The counselors, they help stimulate growth, expansion, consolidation, focusing on the spiritual and intellectual side of things through education, guidance. They don't have authority over the assembly. It's more like advising, supporting, fostering learning together.
Okay, that relationship makes sense. And it leads us nicely to the next thing. How does this unique way of doing things show up when it comes to choosing leaders? How do Baha'is actually elect their assemblies?
Well, the Baha'i election process is really unique because it's completely non-political. There's zero nominations, no campaigning, none at all, and the vote is secret. Shoghi Effendi was very clear, warning against the foul odor of the parties and peoples and their pernicious methods, things like intrigue, party politics, propaganda. The whole idea is to choose people based on their spiritual qualities, their ability to serve, not because they're popular or good at politicking.
No campaigning at all. It's hard to imagine sometimes.
It is. Eligibility is basically for any adult believer in good standing. Though continental counselors can't be elected, and auxiliary board members who assist the counselors, they have to choose which role to keep if they're elected to an LSA. And participating in these elections is seen as a spiritual obligation. It really matters for the health and growth of the Baha'i community. The aim for every voter isn't to get elected themselves or push for a friend. It's to prayerfully consider and vote for those 9 people in their community. They feel best show qualities like trustworthiness, selfless service, mature understanding.
And these elections happen every year, right? On the first day of Rivan, the main Baha'i festival. The guidelines even get into the practical stuff, like using the online balloting system OBS and how to handle absentee votes carefully to keep it secret. Sounds very precise, but also deeply spiritual. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Beyond the elections and meetings, what about the LSA's wider role in building community life? How do these guidelines help assemblies create communities that feel, well, vibrant, like a real family?
Yeah, that's central. The Assembly's main job here is fostering the spiritual health and vitality of the community. This means actively encouraging what we call community-building activities. Things like devotional gatherings, classes for children, junior youth groups, study circles. The Universal House of Justice points out how devotional meetings especially bring out the spirit of the Mashriq al-Adkar.
The house of worship concept.
Exactly. It symbolizes that place where people come together to worship God and serve humanity. These gatherings build fellowship. They open the city of the human heart.
That's a beautiful phrase.
Isn't it? And another key idea in the guidelines is learning in action. It involves this sort of alternating rhythm of action and reflection. So communities don't just, do things. They engage in service. Then they stop and reflect on how it went. They look at data like participation numbers, attendance, things like that, to help decide future goals and plans. It's a constant cycle of learning and improving. And through this process, you cultivate these really important attitudes: trustworthiness, cooperation, forbearance, all essential for a harmonious community.
That learning and action cycle sounds really practical and responsive. The guidelines also mention fostering a culture of growth, and LSA is working with teaching committees and training institutes to get people involved in service. It sounds like a really holistic way to develop the community, empowering everyone. Okay, now for maybe a more challenging area: Baha'i law and justice. How do these divine laws guide everyday life? And what's the Assembly's specific role in upholding them? How do they approach it?
Right. Well, first, Baha'u'lláh himself said about his laws, "Think not that we have revealed unto you a mere code of laws. Nay, rather, we have unsealed the choice wine." The point is, these laws aren't meant to be restrictive in a negative way. The guidelines stress that obedience actually brings perfect liberty, freedom that comes from aligning with spiritual truth. And the Assembly's response when issues come up, it's flexible. It can range from sympathy and encouragement to maybe a warning. But the goal is always to draw people closer to the faith and protect the community's integrity.
Okay, so what are some specific areas the guidelines cover?
They go into several. For marriage and family life, Baha'i marriage is defined as between a man and a woman. It's seen as deeply spiritual. And uniquely, it requires consent from all living parents on both sides. The LSA's job is to educate people about these laws, provide guidance, again, acting like that loving father rather than as a stern judge. Now, on the sensitive topic of same-sex marriage, while some places legally recognize it, the Baha'i teaching state marriage is exclusively between a man and a woman. So if someone is in such a relationship, they should be patiently informed that while they're welcome to embrace Baha'u'lláh and his teachings in their heart, they can't formally enroll as a Baha'i while in that relationship. The focus stays on their personal spiritual journey and understanding. There's no requirement for separation.
That sounds like a very careful, compassionate approach.
It aims to be. Then there's divorce. The guidelines emphasize the year of waiting, a 12-month separation period where the Assembly's #1 goal is always reconciliation. It's a time for reflection, healing, giving every chance for the couple to reconcile. For Baha'i burial laws, they're quite simple and dignified. No cremation. The body shouldn't be transported more than an hour's journey from where death occurred. The LSA helps educate people and supports families. When it comes to sanctions, like removing voting rights, they're only used for really blatant and flagrant disregard for the law. And even then, it's always paired with encouragement, help, counsel, education. It's never made to be harsh or just punitive. And confidentiality is absolutely vital when dealing with personal issues brought to the Assembly. The guidelines also touch on other laws, like Huquq'u'lláh, the right of God, which is a deeply personal matter of conscience related to donations. And of course, obligatory prayers and fasting, which are fundamental pillars for an individual's spiritual life.
This really underscores a crucial balance, doesn't it? How does the Assembly juggle upholding these specific divine laws while still nurturing that loving, patient, welcoming community feel for everyone? That seems incredibly tricky.
It absolutely is a delicate balance. I think the key distinction is this. Individual Baha'is are encouraged to be forgiving, patient, understanding with each other. But the Assembly, as an institution, has that sacred duty to administer God's law with justice. But justice here doesn't mean being punitive. It means firm, loving guidance, education. Sanctions are really a last resort for serious ongoing issues, always thinking about the community's spiritual well-being and the person's growth. It's about protection and growth, not punishment.
That clarifies it. Okay, moving towards the end here, our final section. What does all this mean for how Baha'is engage with the wider world? How do these guidelines shape relationships outside the Baha'i community?
A really central principle is non-involvement in partisan political activities. Baha'is are clearly advised not to get entangled in political fights or join specific parties. But, and this is important, this doesn't mean being detached or indifferent. Quite the opposite. Baha'is are encouraged to be among the most active and earnest of humanity's well-wishers. When it comes to engaging formally with governments or the media, that's usually handled by institutions like the National Spiritual Assembly's Office of Public Affairs.
So active well-wishers, but not partisan.
Exactly. And the guidelines also reiterate the Baha'i principle of obeying the laws of the government. This applies to practical things, too, like for military service, Baha'is usually seek non-combatant roles because of their commitment to peace. Or with vaccinations, the expectation is to follow scientific consensus. The Baha'i writings don't provide grounds for religious exemptions from mandates. What really comes through consistently is the emphasis on unity in how Baha'is talk in public. They're encouraged to associate with all the peoples and kindreds of the earth with joy and radiance, and to try and find that precious point of unity where contrasting perspectives overlap when discussing things publicly, to avoid conflict, foster respect.
Wow. Yeah, looking back at everything we've discussed, these revised guidelines contain such incredible depth, so much practical guidance. They really seem to empower people and communities to build a whole new way of life based on these spiritual principles. It truly feels like a blueprint for transformation, not just for Baha'is, but maybe offering insights for how society as a whole could evolve.
Precisely. And it's crucial to remember this is a living blueprint. The evolution of Baha'i institutions, the administrative order, it's an ongoing dynamic thing. It constantly needs study, consultation, action, and reflection.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. How can these principles, unity, justice, learning, and action, how can they apply not just in a Baha'i community context, but in your own life, in your work, your family, your neighborhood? How can you contribute to that spiritualization of humanity right where you are?
That's a great challenge. It's fascinating how these guidelines aren't just rules set in stone, but really an evolving, active blueprint helping to shape a changing world, one community at a time. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the revised guidelines for local spiritual assemblies. We really hope you've gained some valuable insights today into how these principles are guiding Baha'i communities around the globe. If you enjoyed our discussion, please do subscribe, like, comment, maybe share it with others who might be interested. And we hope you'll join us next time for another deep dive into the world's most compelling ideas. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep contributing to making the world a better place.